G'day. Look at this luminous green grass in the background. I'm at Mount Worth State Park, looking out to the north towards Mount Baw in the background up there. It hasn't been a cold winter, but it's been drawn out with as far as rainfall is concerned. It's pretty much been raining for several months now, so everything's just really nice and green. This is a very steep gully down there. There's the flats of the space between the Strzelecki Ranges where I'm in and the Australian Alps there, starting with Mount Baw, as I mentioned earlier. And that flat area there is also called the Latrobe Valley. So here at Mount Worth State Park in the Strzelecki Ranges of Victoria, we have an example of a juvenile Mount Ash forest. They start off very young, of course, after a big fire, and they're like, I guess, a crop almost, like bamboo. They're tightly clustered together and then they grow taller and they thin out. As you can see here, still in its juvenile state. What are we looking at? 30 metres tops. And that means we have a lot of clustered trees together with low volume, thin trunks, and not super tall. These are meant to be up to 400 feet tall before white man cut them down. And then they go into decline and become an old growth forest, and then they have a bushfire once every 400 years. And that's why the tallest tree that was ever recorded by the Guinness Book of World Records down the road here at Thorpedale was 385 feet. There were 400 footers, but they weren't officially recognised by the Guinness Book of World Records. So, now why are they always in a juvenile state here in Australia? Well, the answer is logging. Every time they reach about 50 metres, they get logged, and the juvenile stage is when they're prone to fire. As I just said, tightly clustered together, low volume in the trunk thickness, lots of leaf litter, and we don't have a proper under canopy. This is all meant to be luscious green tree fern. It's got bracken and weeds. Is any of that decomposing? This is kindling. That's what this is, and that's where we get our super fires. So once you've reached this 50 metres and the tree ferns become established and the lily-pilly are growing as a second canopy, your forest becomes immune to fire. It's beyond the danger zone, the juvenile forest danger zone. And then it'll go on and survive for hundreds of years more, topping out at, well, before white man came, 400 feet. So we don't have that anymore. They log it and log it, cyclic logging all of the time. And it keeps all of Australia's mountain ash forests in Victoria, southern New South Wales and Tasmania in a juvenile state perpetually. And this exposes us to the risk of fire as soon as we have a dry summer. All of this would dry out, and now just throw a match and up it goes. Now that's where you get the super fires from, and there's a lot of fuel in there, as you can imagine. So how the hell did these fires in Maui melt cars sitting on concrete with the odd palm tree once in a blue moon? Now this is more what I'm talking about. You'll see a forest of this age around the Dandenongs to the east of Melbourne, because people live there, they don't log it, and it has reached a semi-mature state, just beyond the juvenile state. So these trees are at least 50 metres tall, still very narrow, thin, growing like billiard cues, but they have established an under canopy there. Some lily-pillies are growing, and below them we've got the lush tree ferns. Now, not only is it cooler, not only is it fire resistant, look at the spacing between the trees, much greater. It's literally cooler, but it's also holding a lot more water and using a lot less water to grow. So it won't dry out as easily in the summer. You see, if you have a drought, this forest will continue to leach water slowly, like a thick sponge drying out on a concrete driveway. It's going to take hours, if not all day. Whereas if you just have concrete, that's going to dry out in minutes and scorch in the summer heat and become extremely hot to the touch. Look at that, a bluefinch. Of course, this forest is in a depleted state, but it is a little older than what we can see across the way here. There's some more of that kindling forest I mentioned earlier. And if we zoom in, we can see that it's all of that non-tree fern shrubbery, highly flammable. This kind of underbrush is typical of what you'd see under a juvenile forest. A lot of bark there hanging, not decomposing on the forest floor. A lot of bracken instead of tree ferns. This is supposed to be the giant circuit. There's no giants here. Looks like they've all gone. There's nothing left but under canopy lily pillies of significant height themselves. Previously there would have been towering mountain ash forests here. Tree ferns are still here. This is an end stage at the end of a 400-year cycle where a big fire comes through and the whole thing starts again. Except there's no old growth forest trees to drop their gums, their gum nuts, to start a new generation. Somehow what should be underneath a towering mountain ash forest that remains is still quite beautiful and pleasant and significantly cooler. These are not really giant. They did reach some sizable stage at some point and snapped off halfway up. That's what happens when the forest becomes beyond mature into an old growth forest. It thins out so much that it becomes exposed. The lightning will strike, the wind will take its toll, and they will lose their tops. Then they branch out from the stump that's left, and you'll get these branches emanating, as you can see, near the top, outward. And that's an end stage forest before it becomes even more exposed, more open, dries out in a drought year and burns, and the whole generation starts again. At least it's good to see that there's some genetic material there to grow a proper forest. It'll take us 400 years to do so, but if it was planted properly in the first place and untouched for hundreds of years, as if that's going to happen, you might see what was here 200 plus years ago. It should be noted that this tree fern under canopy can't establish itself, nor can the lily pilly above. So this is the remnant of what's left after the upper canopy, the mountain ash, has gone. The tallest trees when I was alive in the early 80s were out at Errinundra Plateau. They were in the 96 metre range. The tallest tree I ever saw was 96 metres, and it had already lost its top. That was in Tasmania. I'll see if I can dig up the photo. That comes from around the year 2000, and I was only about 29 years old at the time, 30 years old. And I've got to say, it wasn't soon after that that the rangers did a burn off. All these rangers that virtue signal about forestry on these stupid signs, they go and do a burn off and kill the damn thing. So that was the last of Australia's 100-metre trees. That was in the Styx Valley, if I recall correctly. I used to decorate it at Christmas time to make the world's tallest Christmas tree. A perfect example of ugliness and what you'll see under a juvenile forest. Highly flammable. Now here's an ideal example. We've got some mature trees that are beyond the 50-metre mark above us. Not ideal circumstances for growing very tall, but nonetheless mature. Underneath we've got our tree ferns, and further up the slope, we just zoom in a bit, you'll see a very young juvenile forest. Now here's an ideal example. We've got some mature trees that are beyond the 50-metre mark above us. Not ideal circumstances for growing very tall, but nonetheless mature. Underneath we've got our tree ferns, and further up the slope, we just zoom in a bit, you'll see a very young juvenile forest, very tightly clustered, very large surface area to volume ratio, and as you can see in the foreground, the tree ferns end where those trees start. That is a forest of kindling. It's barely 15 metres tall, dries out very quickly in summer. That's where we get our big fires, from forests like that. So I was coming down the road here at Mount Worth State Park, and around the corner, an absolute delight here, Ansley Falls. All it needs is a setting of pristine, untouched mountain ash lily pilly and tree fern under canopy forest around it. Imagine that before white man came.